On this Sunday night, the deadly Halloween attack in Quebec. The alleged attacker in costume carrying a sword randomly stabbing.
All the citizens of our city are mourning this today.
2 people are dead, 5 others injured. The investigation into the death of a Canadian soldier during a military exercise. Plus, America prepares for a legal battle over election results. And Canada's Silver Cross mother.
I feel like a piece of my soul has been ripped out of my body.
Her fight for veterans' rights.
Global National with Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. It was a terrifying Halloween night in Quebec City. Police say a man dressed in a costume, armed with a sword, targeted people at random. 2 people were killed, 5 others injured. The violence occurred in the city's historic district. The victims were located at 4 sites, including near the famous Chateau Frontenac. The suspect managed to elude authorities for nearly 3 hours until he was finally arrested in the vicinity of the port. The 24-year-old is now facing 2 charges of first-degree murder as well as attempted murder. As Mike Le Couteur reports, police say there are no apparent links to terror groups or any religious ideology.
Police describe it as a night of horror. Officials say at around 10:30 Saturday, a man dressed in a medieval costume brandishing a Japanese sword pulled up at the iconic Chateau Frontenac in Quebec City and began a stabbing rampage.
C'est vraiment hallucinant comme situation. Halloween, pleine lune.
It's shocking on Halloween and with a full moon, says this resident of Old Quebec who lives near the crime scenes. Following a 2.5-hour manhunt, police finally apprehended the 24-year-old suspect a kilometer away near Quebec City's Old Port. But that was after he allegedly killed 2 Quebec residents and injured 5 others. Police don't believe the attacks were motivated by politics or religion.
According to our preliminary information, nothing indicates that the suspect would have acted for motivations other than personal.
The suspect is Carl Giroir. It's believed he lives in this apartment block 20 minutes north of Montreal. Heavily armed police officers spent the day here looking for clues pointing to why he drove nearly 3 hours to allegedly commit such acts. Acts that bring back horrific memories of the mosque shooting in the provincial capital nearly 4 years ago.
It reminded us all of the tragedy of the 29th of January 2017 when 6 of our people in Quebec City died.
Police say, according to a medical source, 5 years ago, Giroir allegedly talked about carrying out such acts. And while the police chief didn't make the connection to mental health concerns, Quebec's mayor did.
Mental health is the biggest security that's a challenge for the future of our own cities or of the country.
As officials grapple with what went wrong, there remains a realization that pandemic restrictions essentially shut down that part of Quebec City, meaning Saturday's rampage could have been a lot worse. Mike Le Couteur, Global News.
The military police are investigating the death of a Canadian soldier killed during a training exercise in Alberta. Corporal James Choi was an Army reservist from BC. The 29-year-old was shot Friday night while taking part in live fire training at CFB Wainwright. He died in hospital yesterday. Choi joined the Canadian Armed Forces in 2016. Both Joe Biden and Donald Trump are using the final stretch of the campaign to woo undecided voters. Today, Biden focused on Pennsylvania, while President Trump went on a campaign blitz in Michigan, Iowa, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. A new poll puts the Democrats ahead, but as Jennifer Johnson reports, that doesn't guarantee a win.
Late in the game, but still fighting to keep his job, U.S. President Donald Trump is campaigning in 5 states Sunday, dissecting the country from Michigan to Miami.
Under my leadership, our economy is now growing at the fastest rate ever recorded, 33.1%.
Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden is targeting swing state Pennsylvania with 2 rallies in Philadelphia.
We need every single one of you to get out and vote on Tuesday. My message is simple. Pennsylvania is critical in this election.
Running mates Mike Pence and Kamala Harris are both courting crucial votes in North Carolina and Georgia. As early voting continues to shatter records, close to 92 million people have already cast their ballots. Meanwhile, a new NBC News Wall Street Journal poll shows Biden holds a double-digit lead over the president, 52 to 42% among registered voters.
We're hopeful, very hopeful.
But Americans may not know who their next president is Tuesday night. States like North Carolina and Pennsylvania can count votes several days after the election. Cities are taking precautions to prevent any violence.
We're not going to tolerate them coming for the property, the product, or the people.
The COVID-19 crisis is still looming over the election. That new poll shows 57% of Americans disapprove of the way the president has handled the pandemic.
I think December is probably going to be our toughest month, but when you look at what's happening in states right now, you're seeing accelerating spread.
Somber months ahead as a new Stanford University study shows 18 of Trump's rallies, where attendees rarely wear masks, may have led to over 30,000 cases of COVID-19 and 700 deaths. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
Our Washington Bureau Chief Jackson Proskow joins us now. Jackson, let's talk about the lawyering up and the legal preparations already underway to contest the election results, and it isn't even voting day.
Good evening to you, Robin. This is all because President Trump is pushing the view that the election results must be known on November 3rd, even though historically that hasn't always happened, and even though states are given weeks to certify their results and finish counting, and they've already warned it's going to take extra time to do that count because there are so many mail-in ballots. But here's what's happening across the country. In places like Harris County, Texas, that's where Houston is, Republicans have gone to court to try and have 125,000 ballots that have already been cast thrown out. These were ballots cast at drive-in voting sites. In Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, officials are already preparing for inevitable court challenges, and they say they're going to segregate any late-arriving mail-in ballots. They'll put them off to the side just in case there's a later court ruling that results in them being thrown out. Trump's strategy in particular seems to rely on the courts to sway this in his favor, but it only works if this is close. But I can tell you that if Republicans are fighting things in Texas, typically a Republican stronghold, that tells you they're worried about the big picture here, Robin. That's not a good sign for them. And also, you have to keep in mind that the way the election results unfold on election night could swing wildly. You might see things sway toward Trump as the early count comes in, and then later, as mail-in ballots are processed, it could swing back toward Biden. So be wary of anyone trying to make an early victory claim on Tuesday.
Jackson, Jennifer Johnson mentioned the latest poll, but really, isn't it still an election that's too close to call?
It is. I know it's counterintuitive to talk about this being a nail-biter when you're also talking about a 10-point spread, but when you dial down to the state-by-state level, the key states that matter, things are much, much closer there, and really we're left with a couple of issues. One is the big unknowns out there. We don't know what the impact of that early, unprecedented turnout is going to be. We don't know about all these mail-in ballots, whether they'll be counted, and at the end of the day, we don't know if there will be some sort of disruption in some areas on Election Day, like violence on the polls, which is a major concern here as well. At the same time, we also know that it can still be anybody's race. There are pathways for both men here. So while things look better on paper for Joe Biden right now, make no mistake, Donald Trump still has paths that could let him eke out a win here.
Jackson Proskow in Washington. Thanks, Jackson. There's no doubt Canadians will be watching the results Tuesday night and wondering what the final outcome will mean for this country. A new Ipsos poll conducted exclusively for Global News found 69% of Canadians feel a Joe Biden victory would be good for Canada. 22% would prefer a Donald Trump re-election. Overall, 60% of people surveyed worry about potential violence if Trump loses. For more on what the Canadian government is doing to prepare for the outcome of the election, let's bring in our Ottawa Bureau Chief, Mercedes Stevenson. Mercedes, what are you hearing in the halls of power in our capital?
Robin, a senior government source told me that planning for this election began much earlier than previous U.S. elections. As you can imagine, those preparations have been intense, with a flurry of briefings and threat assessments. The real wild card in all of this, of course, is U.S. President Donald Trump. For months, he has said the only way he can lose is if there's fraud. And so Americans and Canadians are bracing for the possibility of a contested result.
I'm not as alarmist as some people. I don't assume he's going to hold on to his desk and refuse to leave. But I do think there could be turmoil. If he thinks confusion and chaos can help him hang on, can help affect recounts and contests, I think there's every prospect he'll engage in it.
Multiple sources told me that the Canadian government will do everything it can to stay out of U.S. politics and the line of fire until there is a clear result. In the meantime, we may see some civil unrest or the possibility of violence south of the border, and that could have repercussions up here in Canada.
One scenario that is always a nightmare scenario for Canada is the issue of security threats coming from Canada, crossing the Canadian-American border and reaching the U.S. The fear on our side is always that the response on the American side will be to close the border, which economically would be devastating for us.
A former senior Canadian intelligence official told me that agencies here in Canada will keep a close eye on border states like Michigan and Washington. Still, most experts agree that American institutions will withstand whatever chaos we may see in the weeks to come. The Trudeau government says that it will be ready to work with whomever ultimately wins the White House. Robin?
Mercedes Stevenson in Ottawa. Thanks, Mercedes. Turning now to COVID-19. America's top infectious diseases expert isn't holding back. In a new interview with the Washington Post, Dr. Anthony Fauci contradicted the president's claim that the U.S. is rounding the turn on the virus. Fauci says the U.S. could not be positioned more poorly in this pandemic. He warns Americans are in for a whole lot of hurt in the weeks ahead. Trump is facing more intense criticism from the Biden campaign over his handling of the pandemic. Former President Barack Obama says thousands of American lives could have been saved if the U.S. response was more like Canada's.
If we had handled this pandemic like Canada did, 140,000 of our fellow Americans might still be alive today. That's a sign of how much leadership in the White House matters.
Here's how Canada is doing compared to the U.S. when it comes to coronavirus deaths. In the U.S., there have been roughly 70 deaths per 100,000 people. In Canada, there have been about 27 deaths per 100,000 people. Canada may be faring better than the U.S. in this pandemic, but in some parts of this country, case numbers are rising fast. Both Quebec and Ontario reported more than 950 new infections today. There were more than 300 new cases in Manitoba and 74 in Saskatchewan. Further west, case numbers aren't reported on the weekend. Coming up, the message from seniors: don't diminish their vote. Trump and Biden have focused their campaigns with one specific segment of the population in mind: seniors. They were a very important part of Trump's win in 2016, and the demographic is growing. Tonight, our Mike Armstrong has a look at their role.
It may be a good thing this election is wrapping up. The frustration here in Cambridge, Ohio is building. Pop into the local Republican office and they'll tell you how their Donald Trump stand-up lost its head.
Girl walks up, looks like she wants to take a picture, and she tore the head off the multiple cameras.
Well, a few blocks away, James Love has a story about his Biden signs being stolen. 3 and counting.
It's not so much the sign, it's the principle.
Now, this county went to Donald Trump in 2016 in a landslide. But even here, where over and over we were told this
is definitely Donald Trump country.
Even the most ardent Trump supporters admit some seniors have been rubbed the wrong way.
Because they don't like his personality.
By his style.
It does rub him the wrong way, because my best friend hates him for it. And she was going to vote opposite because of it. And I said, you can't do that.
County officials here empty the early ballot drop-off box a couple of times a day. Well, when they start counting the ballots Tuesday, polls predict a substantial shift by seniors. In 2016, Trump won seniors nationally by 7%. Going into Tuesday's vote, he's losing that group to Joe Biden, according to some polls, by 10%.
Well, seniors are vital because seniors vote.
Political scientist Michael Binder says as a group, seniors are the most likely to show up at the polls, and they're growing. Americans 65 and over were 21% of eligible voters in 2016. They're 23% this time, and in some states, even more.
We're a graying country. They're going to be 30% of the electorate in Florida, which is a crucial swing state.
Seniors will be first. We make seniors first, right?
Trump's speeches for weeks have included a promise seniors will be at the front of the line when a vaccine is ready. But he's also mocked Biden as a nursing home resident and claimed the virus affects virtually nobody.
Who was he talking about when he said it affects virtually nobody? He was talking about America's seniors. He was talking about you.
Mr. Trump has shown that he's callous.
Back in Cambridge, James Love says Trump's basically written seniors off. Well, if poll numbers hold, the shift by seniors could be the biggest factor in a Biden win. In fact, if Biden's lead with older voters hits double digits, some pollsters say it could mean not just most swing states go to him, but all of them. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Cambridge, Ohio.
Still ahead, this year's Silver Cross Mother. Every year, the Royal Canadian Legion picks a Silver Cross mother to lay a wreath on behalf of the families who have lost their son or daughter in the service of their country. This year's Remembrance Day ceremony will look a bit different because of the pandemic, but Debbie Sullivan will be there, and she hopes Canadians will take time on November 11th to honor those like her son, Navy Lieutenant Chris Saunders, who made the ultimate sacrifice. Ross Lord reports.
When a life comes to a sudden end, just as it's blossoming, there's a particular sadness. 16 years after Navy Lieutenant Chris Saunders died, his mother, Debbie, has never been the same.
I feel like a piece of my soul has been ripped out of my body. We're not supposed to outlive our children. He's my son, and I don't ever want him to be forgotten. So I speak his name daily. I talk to him daily.
Chris Saunders died in a fire on board a Navy submarine in 2004. HMCS Chicoutimi was en route from Scotland to Halifax to begin service in the Canadian fleet. 2 other crew members were badly injured. At age 32, Saunders had started a career as a combat systems engineer. He was married with 2 children. To keep her son's memory alive, Debbie has been named the Royal Canadian Legion's National Silver Cross Mother. She's attending Remembrance Day ceremonies in Ottawa, limited by the pandemic, but still going ahead.
They did tell me that it would be a lot smaller. They did tell me that there would be a lot of wreaths that were pre-laid ahead of time, but that I would actually be laying a wreath. Social distancing, of course, and they assured me they would keep me very safe.
Some days are still a struggle.
You know, certain songs come on and stuff, but
tough moments that arrive out of the blue.
Yeah, just different songs that remind me of him.
She takes pride in tributes, like the elementary school named after Chris in his hometown of Quispamsis, New Brunswick.
This is my favorite picture of him. He's on board a ship, he's looking out to sea. It's like he's very thoughtful and thinking. In the background is him in his football uniform, and on the other side is him mountain biking.
And he looks ruggedly handsome there.
Well, of course.
So how could you not be proud of that?
Of course he is.
Right?
He's got his mama's eyes.
Finding positives in the lingering effects of tragedy. Ross Lord, Global News, Clifton Royal, New Brunswick.
Up next, a stark reminder of those who've lost their lives to a vicious virus. The pandemic has added another layer of anxiety to the already tense U.S. presidential election. And on a patch of grass a few kilometers from the White House, the human toll of what's unfolded over the past 9 months is laid out in long lines of white flags. Donna Friesen is reporting from Washington this week, and what she discovered is a memorial reminiscent of war.
It is stark, it is simple, and the scale of it is overwhelming.
I'll tell you, it breaks my heart because each one of these flags is a person.
More than 229,000 white flags, one for each life lost to COVID-19 in the U.S., planted in rows like a wartime cemetery. It's the work of artist Suzanne Brennan Furstenberg.
In mid-August, I read a Washington Post headline that said government official says 170,000 deaths is just a statistic. And I thought, oh my God, this can't be.
It took her months to get approval to do this on the parade ground of the Washington, D.C. National Guard Armory. And what started small just keeps on growing. Edna Tempener volunteers to be here.
I think I've planted about 5,000 flags. We've been failed. We've been failed by our leaders.
In the middle of the field, we spot this young woman, Christine Uncles, planting a flag for her father.
It was heartbreaking, and it was just very overwhelming. I didn't expect to see so many flags. I knew the number was high, but it was just, to actually visually see it was just absolutely disturbing.
She was by her dad's side, John, when he died of COVID-19 in April. He was 69.
It crushes me to know that there's so many more out there, and my dad was one of them.
What does she think of how President Trump has handled the pandemic?
I think it's awful. I think he handled this absolutely poorly, and I very much hold his action and reaction to this fully responsible for all of these deaths.
The white flags, says Furstenberg, represent innocence, not surrender.
I felt compelled to make the number experienceable, if you will.
It's often artists who can best interpret the moment we are in.
We're divided by ideology. We're divided by race. We're divided by socioeconomic factors. The one thing that we can unify about is grief, because we've all lost something. If people haven't lost a loved one, they've lost jobs, they've lost businesses, they've lost educational opportunities. The loss in the U.S. has been tragic, just immense. And so if we can't agree on anything else, we can at least unite in our grief and in our mourning that we are still in the midst of this tragedy.
Donna Friesen, Global News, Washington.
And that is Global National for this Sunday. I'm Robin Gill. Tonight we leave you with last night's full moon seen from BC. Thanks for watching. Good night.